Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Caucus for this evening. We do have a presentation from the school district, but to give a couple members a second to get here, we'll run through the agenda quickly and then we'll proceed. Mr. Jimenez, do you mind running through everybody?
Adams. Present. Anane. Vallerin. Brody. Farrell. Flynn is absent. Hoey.
Here.
Johnson is absent. Jones.
Present.
Keegan. Lumpkin.
Present.
Powell. Robinson. Williamson.
Present.
Zamer.
Here.
10 present. We are also joined by Senior Assistant Corporation Counsel Martha Mahoney, Legislative Director Brian Jimenez, Research Counsel Robert Wenner, Junior Legislative Aide Carly Johnson, as well as the fine folks from the City School District of Albany. Oh, and I do see Owusu is present.
Thank you so much. We'll run through the agenda quickly and then welcome our guests up. We'll have the minutes from April 20th to pass, and then in local laws introduced from Councilmember Johnson, Local Law H of 2026, which is on behalf of housing. It amends the Code of the City of Albany in relation to added protections against housing discrimination and increasing the enforcement of fair housing violations. That will go to housing. I know that Mr. Johnson isn't here, but I'm not sure if
I'm a co-sponsor on that.
Would you like to say a few words on this, Ms.
Yes,
Keegan?
I would love to. We were hoping to actually get this in April, which is Fair Housing Month, but we are running a little bit late. Neighborhood Services started working on this legislation last year. They held off on introducing it because we were reaching the end of session and it wasn't ready in time. But essentially what the legislation does is sort of mirror the fine and fee structure that exists currently under state law. So for example, if the Division of Human Rights were to pursue a fair housing case in state court, they would be able to levy certain fines to cover the cost of that prosecution. We have the Fair Housing Officer here in the City of Albany. We also have the Commission on Human Rights, and that legislation essentially authorizes us as a city to litigate on behalf of residents who are facing fair housing discrimination, and some of those cases we do take to court. And so what the legislation does is allow us to levy fines involved in those cases, which will help us to offset the cost of that work, both in Corporation Counsel as well as the investigative side that is conducted by our Fair Housing Officer. It's, I believe, estimated when I spoke with them to potentially bring about $40,000 a year in revenue and fines based upon the current caseload that they have.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that rundown. Next, an ordinance is introduced. We have from Councilmember Keegan, Ordinance 105126, an ordinance authorizing and directing the grant of an easement to Center Square LLC for a portion of the city right-of-way adjacent to 1233 Broadway. That will go to Finance. Would you like to say anything on this, Councilmember Keegan? It's kind of a standard thing.
I think we can wait till Finance. This is a pretty procedural piece of legislation. I will make sure, however, that we get all of the stuff in time for committee.
Yes, if we can just make sure, as you also desire, that we get all of the pieces that we need in order to move it through committee, that would be great. From Councilmember Adams, Ordinance 115126, an ordinance amending Chapter 363, Vendors of the Code of City of Albany in relation to expanding mobile vendor opportunities in the City of Albany. Councilmember Adams, did you want to say anything on this?
Just briefly, just to give a overview of the legislation, Ordinance 115126 is to expand the section for vending here in the City of Albany. The goal here is to allow for expansion of different type of food trucks and also mobile services which previously was not included in the legislation. So we added language to define and clearly clarify services as a product of what people could do here in the city of Albany. We also have language in there to focus on healthy products. A license structure is also being created for a permit process to do this. We want to make sure that, you know, areas that are food deserts and do not have healthy food options have options in terms of people selling produce. We also are, again, looking at expanding the overall locations for throughout the city. Currently, there's just particular locations right here, down by the Capitol and a few other places. This legislation would expand that. So hope that our colleagues will support this, and I'm happy to share more at our meeting.
Thank you so much. That will go to planning. The rest of our ordinances will be held. Moving on to ordinances introduced. We will be taking up Councilmember Johnson's Resolution 295126R, recognizing CBA's remarkable win at the state championship. We all were co-sponsors on that one, so I will assume we are remaining so. Next, we have Councilmember Keegan's Resolution 345126R, a resolution of the City of Albany recognizing May 1st as International Workers' Day. I'm assuming everybody would like to be co-sponsors on that. If we could all put our hands up for that one. That appears to be a yes. Yes. And so we'll also be voting on Councilmember Johnson's Resolution 355126R, a resolution celebrating the hard work of KIPP Regional Charter Schools basketball team that got into the state and regional championships in their first year of the school's existence. Is that something that we would all like to be co-sponsors on? Check that is all in. We will confirm with Councilmember Johnson, but I'm assuming that we'll take his two resolutions out of order. If there are people here, while we always welcome people to stay, if they want to not stay, we'd like to give them the option, so we might be taking those out of order. And resolutions held, we have from Councilmember Zamer, Resolution 274126R, which will be the appointment of Jill Delaney as a member of the Albany Convention Center Authority Board. A resolution from Councilmember Lumpkin, 284226R. And apologies if any council members want to speak on these as I go through them, usually at this stage. Councilmember Lumpkin, a resolution honoring the life and legacy of Mother Clara Lumpkin and renaming a portion of South Swan Street in her honor. That will be discussed on the 30th, so I'm quite sure that that will move through, and we'll look forward to voting on that. And I know that Councilmember Lumpkin has a date for that as well, I believe. Well, if you can share any further information. I thought that you might have a date for that street
Yes.
renaming.
May 30th.
So May 30th for that, and we'll share further information on it.
Great.
From Councilmember Williamson, Resolution 324226R, a resolution of the Common Council honoring the life and legacy of Reverend Reginald Graham and renaming a portion of 2nd Avenue in his honor. That's also pending discussion on the 30th. But we expect that to move forward. And from Councilmember Anane, Resolution 334226R, a resolution authorizing the City of Albany to adopt a policy related to disposal of computers, computer software, and computer equipment, and that is also pending discussion on April 30th. So should those all move forward through the committee, we expect to vote on those. And with that, I welcome up our guest from the City School District of Albany. We have Superintendent Joe Hochreiter, Vice President of the board, I believe, Tabitha Wilson, and I think we'll be welcomed by several guests, so we'll turn it over to them.
While we wait for our guests to get accommodated, I will just note we do have our Youth and Government Night coming up at the next regular meeting, or the meeting after this coming regular meeting. So we're looking at May 18th.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. My name is Tabitha Wilson. I joined the board in 2017. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and my fellow board members send their regards. Please excuse me looking at my phone. This is where my notes are. So the City School District of Albany is presenting a proposed $371.5 million budget for the 2026-27 school year that is designed to sustain the strong foundation we have built for our students while thoughtfully planning for the future. This proposal maintains all current programs and services, ensuring continuity and stability for our school community. At the same time, the budget reflects a strategic investment in expanding transportation access to our youngest learners. If approved by voters, this initiative would make bus service available to all students in kindergarten through grade 5 who live 1 mile or more from school, increasing equity and accessibility across the district. This work began way back when we had middle school realignment, and we realized students in North Albany had to traverse through what you would call industrial zones, and we did work in the legislature to change the law and actually add a domain, including crime, so that could be an indicator to reduce the mileage zone. This proposal also includes a modest 1.22% tax levy increase, continuing a long-standing commitment to fiscal responsibility. In fact, this marks the 9th time in the past 11 years that the district has proposed an increase below 1.4, with an average increase of less than 1%. So I won't steal everyone's thunder. I will just indicate that the voters will have the opportunity to vote on our budget, vote on 2 referendums that will outline below, and as well, there will be 2 seats available for the Board of Education. We encourage all community members to stay informed. Our board meeting is tomorrow, and it is available on YouTube, and you can also visit us online. With that, I want to pass it to our superintendent, who it's been a pleasure to be on this journey with you since 2022.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'll move swiftly, but hopefully not too fast. You have all the information here, and certainly will be available for questions. So our school budget supports all of the programs that nearly 10,000 students enjoy right now. We are not reducing any programs. We're not eliminating any programs. This includes all of our programs in 12 elementary schools. That include 4 magnet schools, includes all of our schools in our programs at our community schools, includes the significant investment the board and the community continues to make at the Albany International Academy, and supports all of our pandemic-related supports for students in terms of social and emotional welfare, psychologists, social workers, counselors. It provides funding for all of our athletic programs. We have 67 athletic teams, including a number of teams that are competing and practicing right now. We have 11 CTE programs. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. It includes funding for all of our extracurricular programs, our JROTC program, theater program, music ensembles, everything. Everything students and families are enjoying today is in our budget for next year. It's important that when we're asking a community to support a budget of nearly $400 million, it's a conversation around return on investment. And I'm here to tell you that the investment that our community continues to make in our schools are yielding incredible and historic results. Albany High School has the highest graduation rate since graduation rates have been measured. decades. 76% of students graduated last year from Albany High School. That's more than 20 percentage points higher than just a couple decades ago. More students are graduating from Albany High School than ever before. We had a 33% increase in students performing on 3 through 8 tests in math and ELA. So our elementary and middle school students are learning at greater rates than they had previously. We have a 24% decrease in absenteeism. What does that mean? More students are coming to school, more students are performing, students are graduating at the highest rate that we have ever calculated. We are back to pre-pandemic behavior rates. We know that the pandemic changed the lives of many of us in this room, but certainly children across the country. Our discipline rates are back, are lower than they were before the pandemic. For students that are taking AP courses, and the reason AP courses are important is they are, it is the same curriculum and same assessment, not just across the state, but across the country. Every child in the United States that takes an AP course takes the exact same test in early May, depending on the course they're in. We have a 50% increase in the number of students passing AP courses. 2 out of 3 students that take an AP course receive or are eligible for college credit. That is very significant. The reason that is because we have a 15% increase in students taking AP courses. That matters because students are challenging themselves at Albany High School, and the more that they challenge themselves, the more that they achieve. For our students who are in our CTE programs, for those of you who were around when the community approved nearly a $200 million investment in Albany High School, all of our CTE programs are now under one roof. Students do not need to walk a couple blocks away to a Brooklyn. If you are in one of our CTE programs, you have a 98% graduation rate. These are programs, whether it's cosmetology, STEM-related, barbering, or culinary, health sciences. If you are a student connected in one of these programs aimed to connect you with a career, 98% of those students are graduating on time, and participation is up. I just looked at enrollment or course requests the other day. It's a shame, but also a good problem to have when you have to turn students away. We're having conversations over the next number of months of how can we increase the number of CTE teachers in this budget without further increasing taxes. That's a really, really good problem to have. More students want to be in those programs, and the outcomes tell a story for themselves. If you're not a CTE student, or if you are and you enjoy music, we have a 31% increase in students that are performing in music ensembles as students move from 5th grade to the middle school and then on to the high school. So our budget maintains all of our programs. The return on investment is there. So what are we asking the public to approve? As our board vice president shared, a very modest 1.22% tax increase. I will tell you momentarily that every single dollar of that 1.22% tax increase is aimed at transportation to make sure more elementary students can take a bus to school and not need to walk. This 1.22 is not for any programs. It's not to hire any more people. It is solely for transportation purposes, and I'll get into that in a second. So over the course of the last 11 years, this is the 9th time our budget proposal has been under 1.4%, and as we heard earlier, well under a 1% average over the last 10 years. So our tax levy history speaks for itself. The 5-year tax increase average is 0.55, and the 10-year average is 0.8. The next slide is really important. Hopefully no one has to squint, but the orange represented at the top is the percentage of taxpayer dollars supporting our budget. The blue is the percentage of state aid supporting our budget. So if you look at these trends, the orange is getting smaller and the blue is getting bigger. That means our friends across the street here, the state, are finally paying their fair share to Albany to support public schools. The burden from taxpayers is just not there as it was nearly 10 years ago. That's because of advocacy, that's because of elected officials that our community have put in office, and a lot of folks, including you folks here and some of our friends in county government, making sure that state officials, that the leadership in the Assembly and the Senate and the governor are paying attention that Albany for too long had been overburdened with, or the tax had been overburdened to residents. So this is a very good trend for our school district. Sadly, I need to share that if the budget is not approved, the school board has three options. They can put up the same budget for another vote in June. We can make adjustments to our budget for another vote, or the board can adopt a contingency budget. Contingency budget is basically we go to the bare minimum of the state education guidelines and laws around what we can and can't spend money on when a vote is rejected by the taxpayers. And a contingency budget would mean we would need to remove nearly $2 million of expenses which directly impact children from our budget. What we also have on the ballot, I alluded to earlier, is the increase for transportation. So Proposition 1 is, do you approve the school budget? Proposition 2 is, do you approve more elementary students taking a bus to school? As our Vice President said, the City School District of Albany Board of Education was out in front of this initiative a number of years ago to convince state government to reimburse school districts for transportation if a student's walk to school is unsafe. Unsafe for any number of reasons. You're walking through unsafe sidewalks or no sidewalks, neighborhood crime exceeding a particular level, a number of other criteria. We are using that law that our school board helped the Assembly, Senate, and ultimately Governor sign to seek transportation reimbursement so up to 500 more elementary students can take a bus to school. Right now, elementary students walk up to 1.5 miles from their home to their school. This proposal would capture 500 more students on a bus. Only students who live 1 mile or closer would need to walk to school. Our goal over time, if this is approved, is to continue to chip away at the number of elementary students that have to walk to school. We're trying to see what community support would look like, so we're starting small and hopefully build on that success. So Proposition 2 is, do we want more elementary children riding a bus to school? That's where the 1.22% tax increase comes. We are not a district with our own transportation fleet, as many of you know, so we need to look for outside providers. Many outside providers and school districts that have their own transportation fleet are still struggling getting buses, getting drivers, so we want to start small. We want to engineer early wins. We want families and students to feel comfortable, and if we can expand this program over time, we absolutely would like to. The third proposition is a $98 million capital project that will touch all 17 of our schools. The capital project is funded primarily from a $10 million NYSERDA grant that we received. That was made official on Monday at a press conference at Toast. So the $98 million proposal has zero tax increase, zero. We're able to leverage that $10 million and some other efficiencies to make a $98 million project happen that will impact all 17 schools and will address a number of areas. Energy efficiency, that's the NYSERDA money, so HVAC, lighting, making sure our schools are more efficient. Those are primarily improvements that will be at AIA, Giffen, and Toast because those three schools qualify. However, all the other schools will experience significant investment in large instructional spaces. These are playgrounds, cafeterias, gymnasiums, auditoriums, to make sure, regardless of what school you go to, there is equity in those large educational spaces. We want to continue to make investments in safety and security infrastructure to make sure that when visitors come to school, they're safe, but more importantly, that children are safe. These include alarms on doors. These include improving our security technology infrastructure. and the like. And also, this project includes things that are oftentimes annoying, but things that we all need to do around our own house, whether it's roofing or building envelope and things that sometimes people never see, but that are critical to the infrastructure of our school buildings. So Proposition 3 is a $98 million project that will have absolutely no impact on the taxpayer, and you can see here the breakdown on slide 15 of where those revenues come up from. You also, the community will also vote for Board of Education trustees. Ms. Wilson, our Vice President, is an incumbent. She is running again, and there is another vacant seat. So these three individuals met the 5 o'clock deadline tonight. So these three individuals will be running for 2 seats on the Board of Education. And on Monday the 18th, you can learn more about who they are and what their priorities are and passions and interests are, as the League of Women Voters will host a virtual forum, and we will make sure we share that information of how you can tune in to that really important conversation. The Albany Public Library will also have their budget on our ballot. They are looking at a proposed budget of just shy of $10 million, and they have 3 library trustees that are up for election. The information on their budget and the trustees can be found at their website provided. We have in-person voting on the 19th of May, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. If you don't know where to vote, we can tell you right on our website, or you could give our board clerk a call, or you could vote by mail. You do need to identify and signify that you'd like an absentee or vote by mail opportunity to do that. The instructions are here to make sure that everyone meets their timeline, so all the ballots are in by the deadline and all the votes are counted. And lastly, if you would like some more information, our roadshow will continue next week. We're at the Albany Neighborhood Association. We're meeting with some other folks throughout the community over the next number of weeks leading up to our May 19th vote. So I know that was quick, but I hope it wasn't too fast, but certainly want to make ourselves available for any questions folks have.
Councilmember Keegan?
Thank you, and thank you for coming in to present to the council this evening. I served on the Community Engagement Committee for Albany High School when they were in receivership, so I happen to know quite a lot about the data that exists in Albany High School. And when you look at our graduation rate, even though we're doing exceptionally well in comparison to back when we were in receivership, we still, to many voters, will look like our graduation rates are far behind other schools in the Capital District. But our students do catch up typically by year 5 and year 6. So I was hoping that you might be able to speak to some of that data as well, because when you get to year 6, we're almost on par with every other Capital Region school.
Yeah, we could make sure that we share that 5 and 6 year trend with everyone. I don't have that in front of me. What I can tell you is that gap closes even more. But as you get into between year 5 and year 6, students are making other decisions. We have a number of programs to try to keep kids connected to the high school environment or keep them connected to an educational environment. We have the Tony Clement Center, which is an alternative school. We have the opportunity for students to take credit recovery in a very small setting with a teacher mentor working with students through a very engaging online curriculum with a real certified teacher supporting them. But we're proud of our, to your point, we're proud of our 76% graduation rate, the highest ever. We also know we have work to do. When we compare ourselves to other districts with our demographics, we're outperforming them. Now, are we outperforming Bethlehem? No, we have different resources than they do. But we'll make sure that we connect with everyone, because that's good data to have.
I also just wanted to touch on that point, because when people are, for example, listening to us, as they oftentimes do, and comparing us to numbers that are coming out of North Colony, Bethlehem, so on and so forth, I think it's important for them to hear that our students, by and large, are making up that gap, perhaps not in the same time frame, but certainly not entirely falling through. We don't have 24% of our students entirely falling through the cracks in terms of completion of either a diploma or GED.
Correct. Yep.
Those were my
and-
only questions.
Yeah, I know that Councilmember Ballerin had his hand up, but I just want to note quickly with that, we also have a high number of English language learners, so we'll have people that actually come from other countries that don't speak English yet or are even literate in their own languages, and a lot of times that just takes more time for them to graduate. But they do not, even though those students will go from being illiterate in their home language and not speaking English to being able to graduate from high school with an additional year, that does not count towards our four-year graduation rate, despite the fact that that is incredible, that that's even possible and on part of the student and the teachers. So I have Councilmember Ballerin, Councilmember Anane, Councilmember Hoey.
Thank you. So two things. One, I think you, your staff, your team, and everyone involved should feel very good about the improving graduation numbers. I can remember when they were in the 50s, and you know, to see such a significant increase is something that the board should feel good about, and the teachers and everyone that works at the schools and has been committed to the schools should feel good about. I would be interested to find out how we're doing by economic status. I'm not sure if that's data that you can have access to see how we're doing with retention and just performance by economic status, so that we can maybe see if we can focus more initiatives on certain communities. And I know you already are, but I always think that it's half of it's the schools, but half of it's the economic situation that people are born into. And you can go to Albany High and have been born into a good economic situation and have a very different experience than someone that goes to Albany High and was born into a more modest or challenging environment. So I think it's good for us to know that data, so we could also know if there's anything that we can do on our end to make sure that we are supporting, because it's all about kids, not just school districts. It's all about kids, and if our kids fail, then our city's failing. So I'm glad to see those numbers improving, and wish you good work as that continues to go up. My second question is a question I ask every year. How are we doing on trying to get I know we got a pre-K program for 4 and up. It's ending that we're doing to try to get a pre-K program for 3 and up. I'm a strong supporter in early childhood education, and I do think that this is one of those economic dividers where individuals that have maybe in a better situation can afford to put their kids in a K-3 experience, but those who don't have that option. And I think even if we had something or a pilot that focused on those populations that have the challenges, so that those kids can get that early childhood education. Studies have shown that economically, dollar for dollar, you get a better investment of your dollar for society by the dollars you put into early childhood education, K to 12, more than investment in higher ed. And this is coming from a higher ed guy. I'm a higher ed guy, but community-wise, early childhood education is critical. So I know we still don't have a pre-K-3, so I'm going to put that out there. And my last one is a simple one. I think if you guys have a slide of where voting would be available, I think that'd be great to share. I think it would be easier for us to share something like that with our neighborhood associations and neighbors. So those are my 3 pieces of input. Thank you.
Yeah, we, on our website, we have a page on our website of where you can vote based on your address, based on where you live, and we have shared that with the neighborhood associations and will continue to. Your question around three-year-old program, we do have a three-year-old program. It is very successful. The earlier, we all know this, the earlier children can be in an educational setting, the better. I know that the governor and the new mayor of New York City are piloting a two-year-old program. I would expect that to be a funding priority of the governor over the next number of years. We hear that too. We hear families asking us if we don't have a program for two-year-olds or if the three-year-old program is full where they can go. We're also completing a space utilization study. Basically, how many children are there in all of our schools, how many classrooms, to see if we can expand any of those programs, if we can have more community partners in our schools. We have heard that loud and clear, that it's great that there are community-based programs, you know, in all different corners of the school district. We're trying to create more space for them to be in our schools so that transition, whether it's from a 3-year-old to a 4-year-old program or to kindergarten, is as seamless as possible. More kids in the same place at the same time will only help those transitions.
Just a quick follow-up. Is the 3K still a lottery system, or is it open to all residents?
The 3K is a lottery system. Because of the limited space. We can get back to you with the enrollment, the percentage of families that get in, and if there are open seats.
Now, I'm going to make the suggestion that may be a little controversial, but I do think if we can move more so that open seats could go to those more who may have more economically challenged than everyone. Because I think those are the kids that already start behind when they get into pre-K 4 and kinder. So
Yeah, and you, your first question was also around student demographic and performance. You know, I didn't touch on it, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say, so with all of the great news about performance and more kids graduating and fewer schools in status, meaning they are performing at or above expectations, we're anticipating over the next year to 18 months, we're anticipating losing close to $2 million in funds that those schools receive to do a lot of the work that you were talking about for students in those subgroups that had historically struggled. So it's one of those, if you perform, we'll take the resource from you. And so our advocacy efforts, hopefully after this budget is approved, is to figure out how we can recoup some of those dollars. Those are state education dollars. Those are not that building, not that building. But we'll continue to work with state ed. That is the epitome of return on investment. We receive grant dollars to support the students in the greatest academic need, in the schools of the greatest academic need. Those dollars have yielded positive results that we shared, and then those dollars and resources are a threat to be taken away. So we hear you loud and clear, and we'll continue to advocate.
Councilman Bernani.
Thank you all for being here, and welcome to City Hall. And first of all, I just want to say congratulations with the 76% graduation rate. There's definitely there's progress being made in our city, right in real time. And you know, I share the same concerns with my colleague as relates to just trying to get a breakdown of demographics and also economic status, if that could be shared with council members, so we can also support some of the work that you guys are doing as well. As it relates to Proposition 2, from 1.5 miles to 1 mile, do you anticipate how many students potentially could benefit from that?
Yeah, up to 500 students could be eligible, and it could be more based on families moving into those school communities over the next number of months.
Awesome. And then another thing I want to say is that I'm also on the public safety side of it. Many of my constituents, you know, I tell them all the great things that are happening in the school district. And, you know, I tell them about, you know, kids graduating, going to Brown, going to Ivy Leagues, and some of the AP programs, the baccalaureate programs. I mean, their list goes on and on. And, you know, I want to commend you guys for that. But something that always comes up is they feel like the school district is not safe, particularly Albany High. Is there anything in the budget that address that kind of concern, and also that you could share with us some of the steps that's being taken to get rid of that perception?
Of the perception. We're trying to communicate who we are while we recognize there's work to do. Our budget will continue to support, and in fact, we need to, our budget supports, we can't really announce it, but we have a tentative agreement with our support staff union that will actually increase the number of personnel in our safety and safety, security monitors, and hall monitors. We've had a hard time recruiting all of the folks that we have budgeted. We're creating a leadership position in that department that will be chiefly responsible for recruitment, development, and retention, and training, and recruitment, trying to find folks that want to work with us. We have two new, this school year was the first year of a law across all schools in New York State to have 2 school board reps. And so we have 2 seniors that attend our school board meetings, and they are responsible for reporting back to student government, but also reporting to the board on different issues in the school. This year, a cell phone ban. It's been far more positive than we anticipated. We still have kids, you know, walking around with cell phones. We've got to break those habits. So we have work to do in those areas that you know, people see. They drive by Albany High School and they see 50 kids walking out the door. What they don't know is that many of those 50 students are going to an internship, going to a college campus, or any number of things. So we will continue to share our highlights, but certainly, and as superintendent, I'm here to tell you, we still have work to do.
Thank you. And just my last question, this is probably a shameless plug as I represent the 10th Ward Pine Hills neighborhood. I visited the Tremont Montessori School, and, you know, it's phenomenal. It's such a phenomenal school, from the teachers to the students and all the things that are happening there. I was wondering, has the school district ever thought about maybe expanding, maybe purchase one of the St. Rose properties and put like some type of Montessori school at that location?
Yeah, we are finishing a space utilization study. So part of a capital project, when you ask the state for money to improve your schools, we have to go through a process every 5 years to show the state where our enrollment is, how much space we have, so on and so forth. So we have to have that study completed before we start thinking about any additional real estate or revamping the real estate that we have. So to a degree, the interest, whether or not the school district had interest or not, we don't have enough information yet to show that we need it or that we prospectively will need the space.
Again, just thank you so much for everything.
Councilmember Hoey, then Councilmember Zamer, and then Councilmember Williamson. We'll keep going.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming. As a consumer of the school district here in Albany, I'm happy to say my son graduated last June, graduated with 40 AP credits. He's going to start next fall as a junior. So, I mean, it's fantastic that you're doing it, and I love to see the numbers that you're doing, and I hope we can increase it. One thing I'd love to see, like in your presentation, you say there's a 76% increase. I'd love to know the actual numbers. Is it 1,000, 500, something like that? I mean, a lot of times you look at percentage, well, okay, it's up, but the real number is you probably have around 1,500, if not 2,000, people graduating from our city, and I think that's an important point to make out. I was going to ask you about the phone ban, and you already answered that, you know, it is doing well. There is a couple on my block that talked to me, and I offered to get involved, but they said don't, but I will anyhow. During the beginning of the school year, their daughter gave the phone, they put it in this pouch, and the stamp on the pouch broke the screen, and then the teacher, or whoever it was, took it out and dropped the phone, so now the front and back were broke. And I know that there's, I think the school district said go out and buy a new one, but they didn't have money to go out and buy a new one. So I don't know how they made out, but that was something probably people didn't think about when we started that, and it's all a learning curve. But I am curious, has it made a really big difference? Have teachers noticed that? I'd love to know about that. Thank you.
Yeah, the input that we've received, and we're going through our policy review cycle at this time. So the committee that helped develop the policy is now reviewing how are we doing. And really this year, it's our first year, but really it's year zero, right, for everybody. Everyone took a little different approach in high schools and middle schools throughout the state to see, how students responded, how the community responded. At one point in our school year, in the first couple months, the high school librarians reported more than 100% increase in students taking out books at the library. I know the times I've been over there, it's a different environment. Kids are communicating, playing games with each other's. In the cafeteria, you don't have kids running into you because they're on their screen. It is not perfect. I will tell you that the pouches we have, there are kids that break their pouches because they need access for any number of reasons. The staff at the high school have said the learning environment has changed and is different, and students are more engaged. But we have students that, are doing things we wish they didn't do. So we're reviewing that policy. We have access to the governor and her team. We talk about this with the Commissioner of Education monthly. It's not perfect, but I would say it has created a much more surprising positive impact than we thought. It had implementation dips in the beginning of the year. We had to get into a new routine, and we had to break some really, really tough habits. And breaking habits of teenagers is not an easy thing.
No, it's not. And I'd like to know, because Owusu brought about the safety, I know in talking to Chief Cox, a lot of violence happens on social media where people start calling each other out. So I'm wondering if there was an improvement there.
Yeah, I mean, knock on wood, we haven't had any imminent threats that we have heard from either APD or the FBI or wherever. We have had them in the past around social media and kids making posts. They ended up being not serious and not credible, but the damage was done. But knock on wood, we haven't had those experiences.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm a proud graduate of the Albany City School System from kindergarten to 12th grade. We have one graduate and another one graduating this year. As to the phone ban, my senior at Albany High said almost immediately it was so obvious and such, he had to grudgingly admit that it was a really obvious improvement. It was like you could see people's faces. He said he never realized before that walking in the hallways you didn't see people's faces. And there's a lot more conversation. So I really do commend the district for following through. It's not easy. I know there's pushback. I appreciate that. My question is, going back to the perception, and we know the reality inside our school buildings are a lot different than the perception. And I'm wondering if if anybody has been trying to develop relationships with our large institutions that bring in employees from out of town with families who are in these sort of like high-tech industries and in the universities and in the hospitals. A lot of them are sort of sophisticated urban people who would prefer to live in a city, but they're being directed outside of the city from I don't know what their offices are, like at Albany Med, the graduate medical offices who deals with incoming doctors, and directs them to Cahos for apartments, or directs them to all the suburbs because they are not educated about the quality of our educational system. So I'm wondering if the district has made any effort or has thought about building those relationships to educate incoming employees.
Yeah, I'll bounce to a lot of different strategies we've employed and some conversations we have coming. In one of our staff union contracts, we actually negotiated an annual housing allowance. That if you work for Albany and live in the city, we will. I forget what it is, $2,500 or $5,000 annually. Prove you work here, or prove
If you work for the district.
If you work for the district and live in the district, $25,000 or $5,000. That's made a difference in a couple people who said, I moved here because of that. You know, that was a number of months' rent, mortgage, closing costs, you name it. So that's one strategy. Another is back on March 1st, our first ever director of recruitment and development began. Her specific job is to make those networks, because for years I had been doing it, or my predecessor. So we have a relationship now with the Chamber of Commerce, and we will be active with the Chamber's basically HR recruitment team. We've had conversations with University at Albany and Albany Med around how they recruit and if we can co-recruit. And we've had discussions with, and I know I'm going to forget her name, but the HR director for the city to co-recruit. And the idea is, while all of these companies that you mentioned, nanotech and high tech, or you know, university level, are hiring folks, we want to be there, whether literally or figuratively, at the table and say, yeah, come and join us as well. So those partnerships and relationships have been developed. The community and the board has put their money behind someone whose job it is to make those relationships and be at the table. But what I'm really proud of is it began a couple of years ago where we said, if you work here, we want you to live here, and we're going to incentivize you to live here.
That's great to hear. Thank you. And obviously, anything that this council can do to help promote the school district to incoming residents, please don't hesitate.
Councilmember Williamson?
Good evening. Thank you very much, board members and superintendent. Couple questions I wanted to ask you is that I was there, me and my wife, when you guys first put in a new security system back in the wintertime. So my questions is to you, superintendent, because I know some of the parents was very upset. I was there, and so is it going well? Have you had any problems with that?
I believe it's going well.
Okay.
We have not had any reported problems. I think, you know, you were at the meeting with me and we had a couple others. It was around communication.
Okay.
And I'll say now what I said then. We rushed that. We should have been a little more cognizant that while for us in the school system and our security personnel who all have worked and come up through APD, while for us it was something that just made sense, why wouldn't we improve our security system? We had a number of families who were at the meeting that wanted to make sure that their children or themselves didn't feel like, you know, they were going into an institution. And so we worked that out. We shared that if we could have communicated differently, we would have, but the technology is great. It's swifter, it's faster, and it's less invasive.
Thank you. I thank you for your honesty. Next question is that I commend you guys on the 76% graduation rate. So how can we, I mean, I'm a part of Albany, but my wife and my kids, you know, graduated from Albany. I didn't. I'm a Catholic boy. But anyhow, how can we as a community keep our young men and young ladies to going like to private schools or going to charter schools? How can we keep them in the Albany City School District?
You know, it's interesting. families choose private, parochial, or charter for many, many reasons. What we're trying to do is tell a story based on tangible public results that we're not entirely sure your children will have a better experience somewhere else. We look at the results from charter schools. It's hard to compare because there are different rules. It's impossible to compare our results to private and parochial schools. Different rules, different, kind of engagement. So we compare ourselves to ourselves and other districts that look like us. We wish more families, fewer families would choose our competitors, but we'll continue to tell our story. And from what we shared earlier in terms of return on investment, we're there. I think one strategy we're going to continue to use is to have parents talk about their experience. And sometimes parent experience isn't always great. There are peaks and valleys, just like a child's experience. And to talk to families who started with us, went to charter, private, or parochial, and came back, and to tell that story as well. We think there's a place for everyone here in the city to be educated. We wish more folks would choose us or stay with us.
I like that. Thank you very much. One more question. I know that you guys have a voting coming up in May, sometime in May. I want to extend the opportunity to come to the Neighborhood Association in 2nd Avenue. It's the first Thursday of every month. It's going to be at the VFW. So I just spoken, to the president of the Neighborhood Association of 2nd Avenue. So you're more welcome to come. And they would love to hear from the superintendent as well, board member, because the election is coming up as well. And I believe that the neighbor, the residents of 2nd Avenue, Delaware, and the other side streets would love to hear from you guys as well. All right, and once again, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Continue getting that graduation rate up. You guys are doing a wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have Councilmember Powell, then Brody, then Adams.
Hi. Thank you for being here today. I have a question. I just want full disclosure. I have a daughter who's middle school age, started at Montessori. In 2nd grade, she was diagnosed with dyslexia, and we chose a private option because the evidence-based intervention that we were looking for was not offered at Albany. Which obviously that's a very personal story, but being a council member and understanding that there are really significant links in our community between literacy rates and violence, especially among young people in our community, I'm curious, and I wanted to ask about, the newly established Governor's Center for Dyslexia and Dysgraphia, how that is affecting Albany City School District, and how it affects your budget, because I know firsthand that all of these screenings and interventions can be very expensive, so I'm assuming that there will be some budgetary impact on the school district for that. And I think, the school is only more successful when literacy rates go up, obviously, and so I'm very curious in what the Albany School District has done around that specific issue. Again, because it's personal, but also because it affects all children in our community.
Yeah, we can get you some data on the number of students who have been assessed. I don't have that on me. In terms of training and staff development, typically in these initiatives, for example, in the Science of Reading initiative a couple of years ago from the governor, it came with significant funds that wouldn't be part of this budget. They'd be either grant funds or set aside. So let me get back to you on both the number of children that we're seeing for assessments and the resources allocated to us or to the region. Sometimes the governor will allocate resources for these initiatives to each of the 32, 33 BOCES throughout the state, and then that's where we would engage in that professional development.
Thank you.
Councilmember Brody?
Thank you for being here. Quick question to follow up on what Councilmember Nani had talked about with the school transportation. So the 500 who will be potential, or more as you indicate, that's a rough number, who would be eligible. I'm curious to know how many kids today on average are eligible to take the bus, and how many are not, and so thinking through those three sort of numerical categories, if you don't mind.
Do you have an idea?
Okay.
Just a quick, that's all students in all levels. So that's not just, you can't compare that in terms of just, I know that Deirdre would then be like, well, this is this many, but that's not all of the students.
No, I did ask that. So sorry, you said one more time. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and this, okay. And Proposition 2 would enable potentially around 500 more to enjoy that. Okay, and then the delta then of students who are not, or wouldn't, let's say Prop 2 passes, kids within the 1 mile, with the exceptions you know, would still not be eligible. Do you have an idea of how many students that is? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Adams?
Good evening. Thank you for your time. My question is very simple. There's been a lot of conversation in regards to the transportation for the high school kids over at Albany High with the CDTA. Just wondering if you could provide clarity in terms of if you've had discussion with the CDTA in regards to that involvement with students not being able to get on the bus at certain times, or if you have any plans to address that in the future.
Yeah, we began conversations with CDTA back in the late fall. Our contract with them is expiring, and so our team has been meeting with them regularly and bringing any number of new issues to the table to try to resolve those in our new multi-year agreement.
Thank you.
So I have a few questions. So, and actually, Ron, it's 2,300 elementary students or 2,300 all students? Okay, just because that's one of the questions that, and I understand why, I mean, suddenly, to just suddenly transport, aside, let's say that money was no object, just the functional ability to transport that number of students in a year is kind of hard to wrap your mind around. So I appreciate phasing it in, but I am curious about if you've looked at the additional price, like is it in the pipeline to narrow that, first narrow that window, because I would assume that that's the goal, is to narrow that window, but then also include the middle school and high school students in it as well, because a lot of times, as most people involved in students know, we have, like a lot of times our high school students have to walk their younger students to school. It's tough for them to get there. Like transportation is something that matters at all levels, but I also know that there's a lot of funding involved in that.
Yeah, it's really a whether or not our transportation partners can meet the demand. We know that CDTA continues to support our middle school and high school students. We also know that they made some adjustments to take buses off the road. So any conversation about any conversation about more students eligible for transportation really needs to start at the capacity conversation. Do they have vehicles and staff that we could rely upon and then run the math and then determine whether or not that's something the community could support.
Ron, you know me well enough. I love getting in the weeds. And then another question, is it something that, does the state reimbursement not kick in? So we have to fully fund the first year, and then after that, the state reimbursement will kick in?
Correct.
Okay, so that's another piece
80%
to,
reimbursement, yep.
that makes a lot of sense, because it's difficult to reimburse something you have not yet spent the money on. I just will note quickly on perception for anybody that's listening, because our fine people from the school district are well aware of this. I would highly recommend talking to first a student at Albany High. My kids all went all the way through Albany schools, and I will say, as both Tabitha and Ron might remember, while I will put my kids' education against anybody's education at any point, there was a point when the district stayed remote for longer that I personally was not thrilled with and was not quiet about it. And my children were like, no, we will leave you if you even try to move. Like, they were more dedicated to staying in their high school than they were with their mother, which I'm not sure what that says about me or the high school, like, but they absolutely felt very safe going to school. This is not to say that there were not safety issues, but another piece that I will add when we talk about the propositions, that in the exhaustive talking about Albany High that I did, the first thing I will say is it is teachers and staff surrounding the students that make the difference for the students. But if the facility does not work for them, it doesn't matter how good a teacher you have. There's no way that they can reach the student. So this 76% is, a lot of it is because you have teachers who actually can teach students because the building is no longer working against them. And every time, I think that that's so important to keep in mind, because when I was on the school board, which was obviously before the Albany High project, and not that long ago, well, a long time ago now, but our four-year graduation rate, and I always like to say 4-year, because Megan's point, was 49%. So that is a tremendous increase in that time period. And I will say it went up even as construction was happening in the high school, because there were actually rooms that the teacher could teach and reach the students instead of trying to juggle with kids banging on the walls and all sorts of other things. Safety-wise, the school is also dramatically safer in this current facility than it was before, because you couldn't actually limit kids coming and going. People tried, and in theory you could, but it makes a huge difference. And it's one of the reasons why I encourage people to support these propositions, because it does pay off in the long run. Investment matters, because investment allows the people who are doing the work to actually do the work that they want to do instead of fighting with the building around them. So I very much appreciate both of these propositions. It makes a huge difference for our students. And while you are not allowed to talk about it, I am aware that there is a vote yes movement going on. And if anybody would like to know more about it or help donate to be involved in that, I'm happy to connect you to the people involved. And I will say I will be happily voting yes on all of these and appreciate your hard work.
And if I may, if you haven't been to Albany High School since the construction, we do have a budget presentation. You'll largely hear the same information, but on Saturday, May 9th at 10 a.m., that also happens to be our spa day, our Mother's Day spa day. So students from our cosmetology program, students from our barbering program, and now our culinary students will basically have an open house. So you can come hear about the budget. We'll take you on a tour of the high school, and you'll see students in action in some of our most talented and in-demand CTE programs. You can come if you wish, but particularly for those who haven't been in the high school, great opportunity to see it.
And should you want to participate in the spa day, the information is online. You can get a great deal for some great services. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
And with that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Keegan for our Finance Committee meeting.
Thank you, and I wanted to invite Richard, if you wanted to come up and hang out in the hot seat with us for a while. I'll try and get you out as quickly as possible because I know you're essentially skipping choir practice to hang out with us again this evening. With a show of hands, who's staying for finance tonight? Are all of you staying? Okay. Okay. So good evening and welcome to the April 29th, 2026 Finance Assessment and Taxation Committee meeting. With us this evening, we have staff members Carly Johnson, Brian Jimenez, Robert Winner, committee members Megan Keegan, Ginny Farrell, Art Lumpkin, Alfredo Ballerin, and Deirdre Brody. And then in addition, we have council members Zamer, Hoey, Williamson, Jones, and Powell. Am I missing anyone? No. Okay. So without further ado, tonight we wanted to start out with a conversation with former council member Richard Conti, who has graciously agreed to join us this evening to talk about updates that were made to the charter as well as the city code with regard to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, and the intention that the council had with regards to oversight around the transfer of budgeted funds throughout the fiscal year. And I don't know, Richard, if you just want to provide some background and context to that.
Sure. So this goes back to 2021, and there was actually, Ginny will remember this, there was a situation, a transfer, I believe in E&A, that we probably felt should have been counted as counting towards the 4% cap, and I forget if it was like a fund balance transfer or federal funds or something like that, but there was a need to, and there was a dispute between the council and the administration in terms of what budgeted funds meant. It's not defined. So one of the amendments that we adopted back then, it was at the end of 2021, we got it in just at the last meeting, I believe, was to define the term budgeted funds that were subject to transfer. And that was the amendment that was added to section 604, subsection, article 6, section 604, subsection D, paragraph C, which basically added, for the purposes of this subsection, the term budgeted funds shall mean funds included in the adopted budget pursuant to section B of this section, additional funds to the general fund under this subsection, and then the important language was, or any transfer of funds from an unappropriated fund balance. And that was meant to bring in all these other off-budget funds that were not part of the budget, but that there was a tendency to transfer these in from time to time. But in terms of how they were counted against the 4% cap, they were all exempted. So they were never included in terms of whether or not that cap was pierced. So that was the first amendment, was to define that, that term. It was subject to public hearing, and actually the mayor, Mayor Sheen at the time, had the public hearing. I spoke at that hearing. She did affirmatively sign that one into law. And I sent out, I sent you my remarks that I made at the public hearing. I don't know if you shared
Correct,
those.
and I did send that to had staff send that to the committee members.
Okay.
And I can certainly, for those of you who are not on the committee who want a copy of all the materials that were sent out to committee members, I can have staff send that to the full council list. It includes ENA, the end of year ENA transfer reports starting in 2022 after this law was passed. And from my review of those, it does not appear that anybody ever followed the change in statute. They continued to put large amounts of appropriated funds.
Well, I think coming back to this, the December ENA meeting last year where a large sum was transferred, I think under the amendment, that should have been covered. And I'm not sure why, but you know that it didn't happen. So that was one thing, to try to capture those, to clarify and to give more authority, and that my remarks that I delivered at the public hearing kind of summarized the intent, et cetera, on that as well. The other amendment, which was passed at the same time, related to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, which has been a long-standing issue in terms of how that board is comprised and council representation on that. So there's a long history in terms of how that board has evolved with representation. Up until the point of that amendment, the board consisted of the president of the council, the city treasurer, the city auditor, the mayor, and all of whom are elected officers, and then the corporation council, who is not elected. So the other amendment that was adopted and that became part of the charter changed the composition of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment to give the council added representation, to provide that the president pro tem or their designee would have a seat on that board in place of the corporation council. So it removed corp council from the board, put the president pro tem or their designee in, and the board then was just totally all elected officials. And the thing about ENA is, I mean, the council theoretically has the authority over the budget, the adoption of amendments, et cetera, but doesn't have really, you know, control of amendments post-budget except through ENA. So the intent there was to try to expand that. Let me just note on that, when prior to that, and when I was president pro tem, anytime the president of the council could not make an ENA meeting, under the charter and second-class cities law, the president pro tem always substitutes for the president. So I would often attend ENA meetings and participate in ENA meetings when the president was not there or could not attend. Notwithstanding that the president pro tem under these amendments is now a member or their designee, that still stands. So if you have a ENA meeting where the president can't be there, the president pro tem does have the authority to attend in their place. Notwithstanding that the president pro tem is also a member in their own right, but and the expectation when we passed that amendment was that the president pro tem would designate someone other than themselves to attend or be a part of the ENA, the logical person being the chair of Finance Committee. So I just want to note that. And I was just noting in terms of the meeting, the ENA meeting back in December of last year, the December 2nd meeting, which was really the key meeting where that big transfer from the debt reserve happened. And I was surprised to see that there was no council representation at that meeting at all. Which, you know, that at that meeting is when the concern should have been expressed regarding the validity of that transfer, and whether or not it was in compliance with the charter amendment, but there was no council representation at that point to really challenge it.
And we wholeheartedly, I believe in earlier meetings, took full accountability for that lack of attendance. There have been significant internal discussions about ensuring that both when Kelly is unavailable or myself is unavailable for a meeting, who is going to be the backup? Do we need to, you know, for example, have some sort of resolution that designates council staff having the ability to attend on our behalf, so that there is always some representation from the council present. I have also worked with the chief city auditor, and those meeting times have now been moved to 4 p.m. on Tuesdays, which is a much more tenable time for those of us who work full-time. We had requested, when I took over, that those meetings would be moved to either first thing in the morning, 8:30, or later in the day, to account for the fact that council members typically have a full-time job rather than in the middle of the afternoon. So I think that will help to mitigate the times when council members are absent from those meetings.
But going back to the amendment and the reference, including any transfer of funds from an unappropriated fund balance, I mean, that clearly should, and I think the intent was, that's not just the fund balance, but also in the same way, the debt reserve fund accumulates in the same way, and that also is in the same way an unappropriated fund balance, but it's a fund balance for debt reserve. So that, under the amendment we did in 2021, that should have been covered as well. And the language in here in the E&A minutes for calling it an appropriation or a transfer, it's the same thing. You're moving money back and forth. And in fact, the notes, the explanation in the minutes there actually uses the term transfer from the debt reserve. So it's, you know, whatever. But if the question was, should that have been covered under the 2021 amendments, I think clearly it should have. Not making any, you know, remarks upon the appropriateness of it or whatever, but we're talking procedurally right now, and the council's authority to have oversight over it. So, was that?
Those are my questions, but I do want to allow for other council members to ask questions of Councilmember Conti and any of the historical context. Our purpose in having him here was really to provide that context of the rule changes that we made in 2021 and how it should have played out, even if that's not how things appear to have played out going forward. Because I did go back and look at 2022, 2023, 2024, and the same process was occurring. So if you were someone like me who was just sort of glancing at the E&A stuff, you look at the percentage marker of the total budget and it would look like it was around 2 or 3%. But in the context now of what happened at the end of last year, I looked more clearly at how we were doing fund transfers, and you would have two categories and oftentimes see $6 to $9 million in appropriations being made in a given year, which if that had been added to the actual E&A funds that were being counted for, the city pretty much exceeded that 4% of budgeted transfers every single year following the amended legislation. And again, that would be on us. We didn't track it well enough, or bring it to the attention, or hold anyone's feet to the fire until the fiscal crisis, and we take ownership of that fully. But there also seems to be some confusion in coming on now as to how that change in 2021 should be interpreted. And from what I seem to understand, the perspective is if they're moving from an unreserved fund for items that we already budgeted for. It should be called an appropriation and not counted towards that 4%.
Well, that's the same thing if you move it from a fund balance and into the budget. It's the same.
I'm
So-
not saying I agree with that.
Yeah,
I'm just saying
right.
that appears to be the explanation that I am
Yeah.
receiving as to why that was done. So without further ado, I will stop talking. Do we have any questions?
Sometimes some of these amendments that we've done are, and Jenny will remember, we're reacting to something that happened where we're trying to then address or clarify it in a way. The other amendments that were made a long time ago, which dealt with salary changes, which went to referendum, we made that amendment also because that back then, in the prior administration, not the prior to Sheen, but prior to that, under the Jennings administration, there was a tendency after the budget was adopted to all of a sudden push through salary increases through E&A. That the council, we never had jurisdiction over or anything like that. And that's how that amendment about salary adjustments were subject to council review. So, anyway.
Do any committee members have questions for the Honorable Mr. Conti? Councilmember Farrow?
Thank you very much. And Richard, thank you as always for your continued dedication. And not only was it a privilege to serve with you, but I appreciate your near encyclopedic memory of all things Albany in your time on the council. I actually wanted to touch a bit on, just because you were not just involved with the current, but like not just this legislation that we're dealing with, but you have 25 years of budget experience within the city of Albany. And one of the things I was curious if you could, were there other things that you could talk about historically in terms of budget context? Because I will say, I know that it was a normal thing to do a spin-up, which now we're kind of dealing with because we're on the edge of that and looking and seeing. I know that it was not 67 years that they negotiated in, because it's a really weird year to 6-7 wasn't even a thing at that time. But I'm just curious to kind of put things in concept, because I know the structural deficit is something that's been there for a long time. So I'm curious if you can talk a bit about that, and then it's also if you've been thinking about, especially because I feel like we might be able to learn more from those things, because to your point, a lot of times our legislation is in reaction to something.
Yeah. You know, when
That you could actually look back and say, like, you know what, during these historic times, it might be a good idea to look at some of these things, because it might be something that would be a good idea for us to look at now.
the council role on budgeting really has evolved. When I first came on, it was in '98 or so. That was when the new charter came into effect, which theoretically gave the council more authority over the budget, and actually had, you know, the presentation by the mayor, the whole provisions with regard to what we could do, can't do. I mean, there was always limitations on what we could do. Being a freshman back there, I was not into details of the way, you know, you might
I don't believe it, but
get into
as you're
after
talking
one.
about that, we also had Sue Rizzo come in and talk about returning to that, but I think she had it inaccurate where she said there was a comptroller and a treasurer, but wasn't it just a comptroller and then they divided those two positions?
Actually, I think it would make a lot more sense to eliminate the auditor position, fold that back into the comptroller's position, this is me, and have a comptroller who has the audit authority as well as the chief financial officer authority, and the treasurer should probably be an administrative appointed position, because a lot of that is, you know, administrative in certain respects. But I don't think there was a lot of logic in terms of splitting the auditing function out of the comptroller and doing the treasurer stuff, except it was politically motivated at the time. But initially, there was a lot of learning from the council in terms of how the new budget authority operated. Prior to that, you just had something that E&A presented and you had absolutely no authority over it at all. You had no budget authorities, you had more. And as that happened, and I'm thinking of the different chairs of finance over the year, which all had their different perspectives in terms of how to handle the budget process, and we also kind of consolidated it into all under the Finance Committee. Prior to that, each individual committee was looking at their own piece. But we've often talked about over the years the need to strengthen the council's authority to make adjustments. A substantial part of the budget is kind of like, off bounds for the council in terms of, especially in terms of staffing and salaries and things of that nature. So it was an evolving process, but the big thing that it all comes back to is the council has limited authority in terms of really making adjustments or reviewing it, and you're sometimes at the mercy of the administration in terms of what data they'll provide for you. And you tend to, in many respects, look at a very small portion, and that becomes the budget. The couple of amendments that we made were one that I mentioned earlier was on the salary issue. And I think these two amendments were the only other budget-related amendments that we made. But we have talked about, in the past, about expanding the authority, especially in the area of staffing and positions. There have been times when we did add positions, and I probably have some legal opinions from our research council prior, somewhere, I know I do, about the council's authority to add or delete positions. And we would be talking about authority to delete positions that were new and not filled, as opposed to filled positions. So it evolved, and I will credit also Judy Deshay, when she was finance chair, who really dug into this in a lot of ways, especially in terms of the capital budget. And the budget book, if you look at the ones prior to the Sheen administration and the ones that what you have now, you'll see that there was a significant evolution in the detail in terms of some of those budgets. And one of the areas where there was a lot of evolution and more information was on the capital side, where it presented more of a capital budget, 5-year capital budget projecting out. You can, debate the validity of some of the stuff was in there, but it was a much better presentation. That's something Judy really pushed on as well. So, I'm not a finance person, more policy-oriented. Judy really dug into the finance stuff and really did a lot in terms of bringing it about. But I think she helped also identify areas where we need to have more authority, and that's what we tried to do. I don't know if that answered your question. Okay.
Councilmember Lumpkin, I believe you had your hand up? No? No, you didn't. Councilmember Valorant, do you have, no? Any, Councilmember Brody?
Thank you for, I hope you don't mind that your former desk is taken. One of the questions I had, just for my own edification, in paragraph C, section 604, the threshold of 4%, that seems to have been consistent even before the amendments.
Yeah, the 4% was part of the original. There was a question, and because this was there was a big discussion on the council during the process where the charter was going to the voters for approval, and the council itself was almost split between a group who was advocating a no vote, basically because it didn't go far enough and really didn't do anything from their perspective, and those who were advocating a yes vote in that it could go farther, but it was better than what we had. And I think and I was just coming on the council when the Charter Commission had been appointed, that Charter Commission had been appointed before I came on. but was following the discussions. One of the issue was, again, the council's budget authority, and when does that authority kick in? So that's how, in the original charter, you have your, and we didn't have the authority over salaries at that point. But the 4% was, if it's more than 4%, then you have to approve everything that happens. And I think the opponents of the charter are saying 4%, well, that could be 4% of, I don't know, of how much it was. That's a large amount of money. Or the 37.5%, or the elimination of departments. But that was always part of the original charter, and it was the idea of creating a threshold where if transfers exceeded that, then the council had the authority to approve them.
Do you help, I'm trying to understand.
And I don't think that 4% that I can remember really ever kicked in. I'm not sure if it did. There was a later point, so the
What do you mean
current,
kicked in?
the 4% cap that was
Yeah.
pierced, where we had to do that. The requirement in the code that the city auditor has to maintain a running total,
Yeah.
that was not in the original charter. That was added maybe 10 or 15 years later, when we were saying, we don't know what's going on.
Right, whose
And so that
responsibility
was
is it?
added later. So that's another area where the council acted to try to get a handle on that.
Okay. Help me understand the magic of 4%.
There's no logic in it. It was just picked. And no, at 37.5%, that was,
Also,
yeah.
Okay.
And I think it was picked in a way, probably, why don't we create a threshold so we can say there's a threshold that if we transfer more than that, the council will act, but let's make it high enough so that it will never be met.
Huh.
So that's, if you go back to the meetings back then, and this is, remember, 26 years ago, a lot of it was politically driven. There was a drive. We needed to reform the charter. We didn't really have one. The Duncan Charter was not really a charter. We needed to reform the charter, but we didn't want to, we wanted to make sure we had a strong mayor, the people there, and didn't want to give it too much authority. So the Charter Commission itself, which was one member from each council member, so it was 15, 16 appointees, and the mayor had a certain number of appointees. There was a lot of discussion on the Charter Commission back and forth, and there was a lot of division on the Charter Commission in terms of which direction to go in. So, if the records are still there, you can go back and look at some of the minutes and some of the vote tallies. You'll see there was a lot of division that was down political lines between those who were proponents of a stronger council, those who were proponents of a strong mayor.
who were in favor of 4% or
I'm sorry?
the votes you're saying on whether or not 4% was the right number?
So that was what the Charter Commission eventually went with, yes.
It just seems, and I think you were noting as well, we have exceeded 4% without due recourse for a while now, right?
I would say that had the changes that were made in 2021 been implemented as intended,
Okay.
at some point during the year, council would have had to authorize additional transfers that would have come out of ENA and to the council. But because they continued to allocate certain things as appropriations as opposed to transfers, they never really exceed. I think the highest percentage was like 3.3%. But when you add in the funds that you see moving around in ENA in the appropriation side, it would certainly have exceeded the 4% marker in the 3 years afterwards, which I think would have spoken to or brought our attention to a little bit more budget volatility than we were paying attention to over the last 3 years. that is not to say, you know, for example, if things were to come to the council, we could still kick things back to ENA and say, you know, we don't need everything to come through. Only expenditures over a certain, only transfers over X amount of dollars need to come through council approval, and everything else can go back to ENA. But it would at least give us a trigger warning at
Right.
some point that, you know, because that 4% at this point is roughly between $8 and $9 million. It's a fairly significant amount of money.
Hence the clarifications I think you're looking to offer in local law.
Correct. And we'll get to that in a little bit. This meeting, I want to allow people who want to ask Richard questions so that Richard can do what he needs to do this evening. Any non-committee members who have questions for Councilmember Conti? No? And Councilmember Verdi, did you have any additional questions? Because
No, I have picked his brain
okay. Richard,
outside of this meeting before.
thank you so much
Yeah,
for.
so you have, and I guess I'm, you know, defer, this doesn't require, I mean, I haven't looked at your amendments closely.
Yeah,
but
so.
I know
so-
sometimes we get into the referendum of the issue, and sometimes we don't, and it looks like these don't, right?
Yeah, the second part of this evening is to, and this hasn't actually been introduced
Yeah.
yet. It would get introduced, I believe, on the 18th, because there's not necessarily a reason to MC it. But we do have the ability to talk about potential policy, even if it hasn't been introduced during committee.
Oh, yeah.
And so the sort of second part of this evening, because I do think we could have some issues coming to a full vote of the body. So I really wanted to discuss it with the committee first before we even introduce it, because I do think if we're going to tighten the reins further, we need to get it right and get it passed. And so we are looking at a proposed new law, which should be local law I of 2026, that would add the term appropriations. So no matter how they structured,
It's not 8.
it may have been updated because they may have something else coming
Got it.
through.
Okay. Go on.
The one I have sitting in front of me is local law I. It may have been local law H in the documents
That's
that
fine.
we sent
It's
out.
fine.
And that's, again, could be subject to change depending on what else comes down the
Totally.
pike for introduction. But it would go back into 604 and add the term appropriation so that it's explicitly clear that no matter how you categorize those transfers, they all count towards the 4%. And so there's a lot of language in there that speaks to appropriations.
Before you go,
Yes, Councilmember Hoey.
I apologize, I had to step out of the room and I missed some of the conversation, but I do have a question. If this affects the charter, does that mean we have to go up for a referendum?
Not in all cases. The charter amendments we did back in 2021, at the end of 2021, did not require it, because it was the technical, I would call technical clarifying certain terms. If it directly affects the authority of an elected official, yes. In this case, it doesn't. I'll give another example. When we did the CPRB legislation in 2021 also,
Yeah.
the only reason that went to had to go to referendum was, I believe, a provision in there where we required that the budget have a certain percentage for the CPRB. That was the 1%, I think, of the police department budget. And so that affected the authority of elected official, and that's why that provision that had to go to referendum.
Okay, thank you. When I always see charter, I always think that we have to do a referendum.
not every-
So
not
thank
every
you for straightening me out on that.
Not every amendment has to go to referendum, only if it affects an elected official in some way or their authority.
can I ask one last question?
Go ahead, Councilmember Verdi.
One of the things, and maybe, I don't know if this is for you or better discussed over local law I, so you tell me. One of it sounds like we want to get definitions really crisp moving forward. So in that spirit, I think how we're defining debt reserve account and whether we're talking about 4% of general funds, all funds, there might be some wiggle room there on how we define it. I don't know if there was intention.
I think we can actually ask that question of Robert, because Robert is the person that worked with me on the creation of the legislation,
Okay.
and we
I just
felt
didn't know
that
if
the
there was
language, yeah,
historical
yeah.
context there that would be helpful, or if that's just for forward-looking.
I mean,
or-
debt, like, the fund balance and debt reserve fund are not terms that appear in the budget
Right.
right now, unless it does appear sometimes when the budget appropriates funds from the fund balance to balance it. The proposed budget and the adopted budget includes that. That's the only time. But there's nothing where the document that tells you how much money is in the fund balance or how much money is in the debt reserve. And it's an off-budget accumulation of funds, I guess, right? That's there. Is that kind of?
I mean, my understanding is that we essentially have three reserve buckets traditionally. We have the general fund,
Right, which is
which-
appropriated and it's budgeted.
which, you know, any leftover funds at the end of the year that aren't spent goes into the general fund reserves, and those reserves hopefully build over time. Then you have a very specific fund that is made up of money that we receive from fines and forfeitures, and there are very specific rules in how we can utilize those funds. They essentially have to go right back to very specific purposes under public safety. And then there is our debt reserve fund, and that is essentially a separate account. And I think we keep this as a separate account because it has to do with money that is bonded, and you really don't want to mix that with the general fund. That can get complicated because those bond funds have to be used for a specific intended purpose. But because when we borrow that money, we don't always spend it immediately. I mean, we've gotten pretty good at delaying those how we borrow money to the point at which we're actually going to need to draw on those funds. So when the council approves borrowing once a year, we have a very long meeting where it takes the finance chair like an hour to read out every single bond and for all of us to issue our votes. It doesn't mean that the city pulls that money the next day. The city will wait to borrow that debt because we start accumulating interest the minute that we borrow it until we actually are going to be purchasing that vehicle or starting construction on a specific capital improvement project, whatever it may be. But we don't always spend that money all at once. And so that will sit in a reserve account and, of course, accrue its own interest, which then becomes our debt reserve funds. Our general fund balance and our debt reserve balance are unrestricted funds. There's no overarching state finance rules or federal finance rules that dictate how the city can specifically utilize those resources. But they are part of how our bond rating agencies, for example, evaluate our fiscal stability. And so they become incredibly important when it comes to how expensive it is for us to borrow money to do the things that we need to do in any given fiscal year. I hope that is a relatively thorough explanation. Feel free to add, Robert.
I think that captured the situation around the three funds at least very effectively. As far as the reference to debt reserves accounts in the language here, I might, ask for confirmation from Brian, who I think probably has a tighter understanding of it. But my understanding is that the phrase debt reserves account or debt reserves funds is pretty specifically defined and well understood in municipal budgeting. I don't think that there's much of a way to misinterpret what that refers to, but if anyone has any ideas for tighter language, it would be very easy to get it incorporated here.
And I would just note, it's always been my understanding, which, to Councilmember Brody's point, might need to be further articulated, even though I understood this. I understood a lot of things that did not actually come to pass. But the 4% of the total annual city budget, that number would be established when we actually vote on the budget. So from my perspective, that 4% would be on the number that we actually voted on. And which, you know, we all know budgets are kind of a fungible thing. That's not going to be at any one point through the year. But that was always my expectation of what it would be, 4% of the number that we voted on ultimately. But that could be wrong, you know. For all funds, yeah.
Traditionally, that is how the 4% has been allocated. So again, if you go back to, so there's an E&A agenda, but also in those attachments to those minutes, there is a separate spreadsheet that gives you your year-to-date allocations. And when you scroll down to the bottom of that spreadsheet, it has a box that says total budgeted funds for fiscal year 2026 are this amount, and then a separate box that says this is what 4% of that would be, and then a separate box that says this is the percentage that we have hit thus far of those total budgeted funds out of the total year-to-date E&A transfers. The issue has been that there is a second category of appropriations, and they have not been counting the appropriations towards that 4%. And those appropriations are typically coming from the general fund balance or the debt reserve balance in order to cover certain expenses. Councilmember Farrell.
Keegan, if we are transitioning and allowing Mr. Conti to, I mean, I'd keep Richard with us for as long as he wanted to stay, but he probably wants to do other things. I just would have, like, in that transition, have a couple of things to bring up.
I mean, if you're,
You are welcome to stay, and you are welcome to go to the thing that you were supposed to be at
Yeah,
at
I've-
6:30 this evening. It is up to you.
no, I have chorus rehearsal or concerts in June. I will make sure everybody gets invited.
Thank you again for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
So in terms of local law I, do we want to just go through section by section? I think that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, if I could just do, I mean, I could do it at the end, but I figured just in case
Sure,
we
go
have
ahead.
other, I just want to do a brief update-ish of some budget things. I wanted to note that we're still working on getting access to the city's invoices and purchase orders in the ERP system, so we do not yet have those. And then I don't know if people saw, there was a Times Union article that had some more information in it that I just figured I'd read out. We haven't gotten this from the administration. Hopefully they'll come in and speak to us directly about these pieces, but I figured that if it was in the Times Union article, I could certainly bring it up here. So they talked about a $14 million budget shortfall and what went into that. So there's $4.2 million in expired federal aid and grants, $2.67 million in lower than projected sales and use tax revenues, $2.46 million in reduced speed camera violations, $1.99 million in lower than anticipated pilots, $314,000 in a property tax revenue shortfall, and $2 million in unplanned overtime. So they are certainly looking into the numbers from the past to really figure things out, which is great. And, just hope that they will come in and talk directly to the council.
Thank you.
and articulate those a bit better. With that, I mentioned this to Councilmember Keegan. I wanted to bring up here the possibility of maybe the council kind of leading, and obviously we'd love to work with the administration, but potentially a working group on the budget, because it does seem like this was something that took several, I mean, obviously we had a new administration coming in that was not fully aware of this, and it might be a good idea to actually bring in some different professionals to have a broader conversation on all things budget and other pieces. It would obviously coincide with what we're doing in the Finance Committee, because I think we're doing a lot of that work here, but potentially bringing in some other voices to look at specific ideas. So I figured I would bring that up. And that I'm not tossing on your lap, Councilmember Keegan, do not worry, because I appreciate that. I'm happy to take the lead on it, but I wanted to bring it up here and just start the conversation, see if anybody, we can obviously talk about this at a different point, but wanted to mention it. So that's all. Thank you.
Councilmember Zamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question as to conversations with the Comptroller's Office, if any of those have occurred, or any possibility of, to your suggestion, if that might be an entity we try to tap into for some professional, you were mentioning some more professionals coming in for some guidance.
I would be very open to that concept. I think at this point, I would really want to see the administration take the lead on that. But I think if it's something that the administration declines to do, we need to have a broader conversation, because the council is authorized to request that as well. But
So at this point, we don't know if that has been requested yet by the administration?
We haven't approached the administration with that concept yet, because we haven't had a leadership meeting with them specifically around the budget since, when was our last one, Ginny? I think it was before the 15th.
It was at, I think, the beginning of April.
Well, I would respectfully request at your next leadership meeting with them that you pose that question.
yeah.
Because time, you know, the year's going on, and we're gonna be talking about the next budget before we know it. So it might be good to have.
It was April 2nd.
Since April 2nd?
Yes, that was the last
So-
time we had an opportunity to meet with the mayor's office as a leadership team on the fiscal.
Specifically on the budget. We still have
situation.
our biweekly leadership meetings, just general meetings, but specifically about the budget.
So I guess as chair, from my perspective, like the start of the conversation on do we bring the comptroller's office in would be at a meeting with the mayor's office. And if the mayor's office is not interested and the council still is, we can still invoke our authority to request that they come in and look.
We have to vote as a body for that? No? That can be
No.
just a
No,
request
I
from
mean,
leadership?
like, I think even citizens can request. I think really anybody can request a review from the comptroller's office. I think that they take it more seriously when it comes from an elected official,
Yeah.
with good reason. But I think it's, I mean, it's certainly something that I've heard discussed, and as Councilmember Keegan said, very open to it, but also want to make sure that we're supporting the administration
Absolutely.
as they move forward, and not something that they are, I think there's a lot of steps to kind of go through before we would consider asking outside of that. But it's our preference to work with the administration and support them through this.
Absolutely. So
Councilman-
thanks. I look forward to hearing about that
Yes.
question. Thanks.
Yeah. Councilmember Valorem.
Thank you, Chair. So on this issue, I would say two things. One, I think we should give ourselves a deadline, because time's moving very quickly, and unfortunately, we cannot slow down time. But we can decide what we do within the time that we have. So I would say, if we don't have any feedback from the administration by the end of May, that in June, you know, if this is something the council wants to move forward with, then, you know, let's bring it up to a full body and let the full body make that decision. But I do also think that, you know, it is important for us to make sure that we are showing the state and everyone else that we are all working on this together, and we're all rowing the boat in the same direction. So when if we do seek that, it's not in a manner to try to seek blame, but more in a manner of trying to get clarity on how we got here. I also think it's very important to be clear that it shouldn't be a way for the state to give us new ways for us to charge our residents any more money. And I'm going to say this because we have had this structural deficit for decades because the state doesn't give us our fair share. And we are now in the midst of a compound problem of compounded decades of us having to have deferred maintenance or us having to borrow to make infrastructure investments because we don't have that cash flow. And I'm going to go back to 2018 when we voted on LED lights on our streets. And when I called other municipalities of how did they do it and how did they fund it, they used their fund balance to pay for it. We bonded for 15 years to pay for it. So we're still paying for those street lights from 2018. So it shows how we as a city have had to work under different challenges because of the lack of funding coming from the state. And the answer cannot just be we're going to put more weight in paying on our residents. So that's the only thing I want to make sure that when we move, if we move forward in that direction, that we do it in a way that's very clear. We're not looking for the state to tell us how we should bring more pain to our residents. We don't need additional fees. We don't need to make it so everybody has to pay for parking. We don't need to make it so that everybody has to pay double or triple for trash fees. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for clarity of how we can do better, but also I think there needs to be a shared responsibility, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that the state in the last few years, especially the last decade, has seen that that pain that we have had and have been more contributing to our budget. So that's important to be noted, that the state has taken significant shifts over the last 10 years, and it looks like it may be even going in a much stronger direction. But I just want to make sure that my only fear is that they shift back the burden on those who've carried the burden for far too long. So that was my 2 points on that.
And I think June is a perfectly appropriate deadline. But again, I want to ensure that we make the effort to engage the mayor's office in that process. Because I think working together cooperatively in that process is the best path forward for all residents in the city of Albany. So I want to sort of circle back to local law I think it's just best if, yes, Councilmember Hoy.
Yeah, and I apologize. When you said June, I'm thinking of the primary, and the controller is up for, he's going to be in a primary.
Mm-hmm.
Would that impact us asking that office?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And I will say that this is a process that Mayor Sheehan went through. I mean, that's part of how, for example, the garbage fee process was developed. That was one of the key areas of the fiscal analysis unit that looked at the city's budget and revenue, made various different recommendations to Mayor Sheehan's office around how to do local revenue generators to help bridge various different budget gaps. So again, I think it's time that we took another look at the budget, took another look at what revenue we may be leaving behind on the table that we haven't implemented. Take a look at how we're spending money, and, you know, have a strategic plan for how to implement. I mean, I don't think any review necessarily is going to significantly impact 2026. What it may impact are decisions that we make for 2027 and 2028. And it may take us through 2027 to really actualize those recommendations, even if we were to get that analysis report back in time for budget this year. So, but I think June 1st is a fairly adequate point in time where we as a body can make a decision as to whether we want to make that request formally.
Thank you.
Councilmember Brody.
I think just to emphasize, I think the idea of a working group, outside counsel, not lawyers, but outside guidance, I should say, in the form of maybe the Office of State Comptroller, budget review. I think Buffalo might be a good example to look at. They also had a new mayor who came in January, and one of the first things they did was request, I think, a similar review that we're talking about here. And the state comptroller, so the mayor and the council sort of jointly requested it. And they're in the midst of doing an expedited review also at their request, so that they're not waiting until it's too far down the road to make any changes in the current fiscal year. So I think there's some good practices happening elsewhere in upstate cities that suffer from the same, not only structural imbalances, but predominance of non-taxable property within their city limits as well. So I think the good news is we're not alone, but I think there's growing interest in that type of review from the comptroller, and be interested to see how that plays out in June and beyond, for sure.
Anything else on that issue? No? No? Okay. So I'm going to go back to local law I. So this would amend section 604 of the charter. First section, paragraph A, literally just adds "and appropriations" to that language. Which again, the intent and purpose is to ensure that no matter whether we allocate something as a budget transfer or an appropriation, it still counts towards the 4%. Paragraph B, again, adds appropriations wherever transfer of funds is discussed. And then would add this line: any transfer or appropriation of funds involving the city's debt reserves account, or any transfer or appropriation pertaining to a given fiscal year that comes before the Board of Estimate and Apportionment in any subsequent calendar year. And that is to provide clarity. So for example, the Board of Estimate and Apportionment is still managing budget transfers from 2025, and it is 2026. So the intent of that language is to ensure that if we exceeded that 4% marker, let's say in 2027, and we're still dealing with 2027 books in January, February of 2028, the council would still have authority to review the money that is moving around from 2027, even though we've started a new fiscal year. Does that make sense to everyone? Because that's not currently something that's really clarified, and that was a question that was being discussed behind the scenes between the auditor's office, staff, and myself quite extensively as to how we're handling 2025 currently. And then section C added a line that says, including but not limited to all funds for all city departments, office, and commissions, but not including funds budgeted to any authority operating independently by agreement with the city. So, for anyone who's wondering and listening, the Board of Estimate and Apportionment also manages fund transfers for the Water Board, which is not really technically under the city's budget. So we wanted to provide clarification as to specifically what should count towards that 4% and what doesn't, because when you start to add in, Albany Community Development Agency is another one where it is technically a B Corp that sits under the city, but is 100% federally funded. So again, behind the scenes, there were many discussions about all of the things that come through E&A and exactly what would count towards that 4% and what wouldn't. And we decided to draw a clear line in the sand that the funds that the city is responsible for versus the funds that we're not responsible for. And so that language is to clarify those activities that come through E&A. And then we changed language, again, in paragraph C to additional fund transfers or appropriations to or from any municipal fund under this subsection, rather than using the unappropriated fund balance, because it encompasses any money movement in any city fund. Questions on or concerns about any of these sections thus far? No. And then finally, we added section D. For the purposes of this subsection, the term annual city budget shall mean the cumulative total of anticipated expenditures as approved by the Common Council through the annual municipal budgeting process, so that we clearly define what specifically is meant by budgeted funds. Any questions or concerns about that? Yes, Councilmember Valorem.
Thank you, Chair. So my question here is, would this give us a heads up if they're going to be moving money from the fund balance, even though it would be less than the 4%? So if it's less than the 4%, but it's coming from the fund balance or the debt reserves, is this giving us at least a minimum notification of that those actions occur?
Those notifications would still come through the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. So there is still that responsibility of the Common Council president and the designee of the President Pro Tempore to ensure that if there's, significant concern about funds moving in and out, that is communicated clearly to the council. It's our responsibility to attend those meetings. I can say that Kelly and I have had near perfect attendance at ENA thus far, and we are working diligently to ensure that if for some reason one of us is unable to attend, that there is a designee in place that will be attending in our stead. One of the issues I think that happened between 2023 and 2022 and 2026 is that meeting was at 1:30 in the afternoon. It was very difficult for our designees to attend, and so their attendance was pretty minimal. In addition, we also ensured that our staff are now on the email list, so they weren't getting notices about estimate and apportionment before. They are now. So we also have the backup of staff checking the proposed agendas on a regular basis to ensure that there's nothing of concern coming across in the agenda. So we're actually now having a grand old time prepping for ENA, which I don't think the council ever did with staff before, but it's happening now. But to answer your question, no, it would not trigger full notice of the body until they hit that 4% cap. I think that if we were to look at legislation that placed limitations on movement from those fund balances to cover general, to cover budgeted expenses that was different than the 4%, we'd probably be looking at a different piece of legislation.
Sorry to dispute you, Megan, but the added language in paragraph B does add a requirement of council notice and consent for any transfer appropriation of funds involving the debt reserves accounts, and for any transfer or appropriation of funds pertaining to a previous fiscal year that is being transferred in a subsequent fiscal year.
We're doing that regardless of the 4%.
As written, yes. It doesn't have to be. We can change that. In addition to the 4%, there's also already the requirement that the council approves of any transfer that would reduce the budget of a city department, office, or commission in excess of 37.5%. So there was already more than just the 4% in there. This adds 2 new circumstances that would trigger council notice and consent.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns about this legislation? Is anybody interested in becoming a co-sponsor on the legislation? Not you. Yes, you. Okay. So can we add everybody that's in the room as co-sponsors? Okay. So that will likely be introduced on the 18th of May, because it doesn't, there's no need to MC that language. I will also note, we haven't gotten all of the information as of yet. They tried to schedule an emergency ENA meeting for earlier today. It was done without proper notice, so it was canceled. We are anticipating the need to do an emergency MC legislation regarding the transfer of debt reserve funds that should be going through ENA, correct?
I haven't had any updates on that yet
Okay.
today. So as of yesterday, that is correct. We're still waiting to hear back from a couple of our colleagues downstairs.
I just don't want anybody to be surprised, because that could potentially be coming down the pike fast and loose between Friday and Monday without a lot of notice. It would be emceed into the agenda just for introduction only, however, so that we can get it discussed in committee and potentially resolved through committee by the May 18th meeting. My understanding from discussions with staff is that that is sort of the last piece that is needed to close the books on 2025, which are still not closed. Yes, Councilmember Farrell.
Do we have any idea, because we are supposed to make a report to the comptroller on April 30th. Do we have any idea what happens if we don't do that as a municipality?
I don't.
Well, no,
it would be
because
an
this,
issue.
I'm assuming it's not going, I don't see how we could possibly, aside from that, I don't see how it's possible to send, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they can send what they plan to have happen to the comptroller before it actually happens. But I would assume that we're not going to be making the April 30th deadline of the end of the year wrap up to the comptrollers. I'm assuming.
I believe that's correct. I don't believe the city will be making the April 30th deadline. I would defer to the Treasury Office as to the implications of that, but we were advised yesterday that it is not a cause for concern and that in fact happens pretty regularly.
Okay. I was just curious if there was anything that was triggered from the comptroller's office side, because the whole discussion of a review might be moot if you know, if you don't make that deadline, maybe that's one of the things that happens. I don't know.
There are also 2 guidance documents on the comptroller's website. I don't know if any of you have ever reviewed the comptroller's website, but they have a whole section on municipal budgeting. There's guidance on how to manage a deficit, revenue deficit, as well as a guidance document on the budget process, as well as the materials that should be presented to the legislative body during the budget process. So one of the things that I would like to discuss as we move along in this meeting is sort of a breakdown of what we have been getting versus what we have not been getting during that budget process that is on that list, with a plan to sort of present a comprehensive list of things that we will be requesting be provided to us for the budget in advance of the budget, which is October. I mean, we have time. The budget will come to us on September 30th, and we will begin our deliberations on October 1st. But I think by mid-August, we want to have that request of documentation in so that they have time to prepare and sort of shift gears, because I do anticipate that we will be asking for significantly more information this year than we have in years past in those budget documents. So that is certainly a future discussion that I would like to have with the committee. Councilmember Hoey.
Yeah, Bobby, can you contact NICOM and ask what happens if a municipality doesn't submit in time? Just do it informally that.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to have that conversation with them, and also happy to discuss further on this offline anytime anyone has questions on it.
Any further questions, comments, or concerns for this meeting? So it's getting quite late. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second from Councilmember Farrell. Okay. Have a good evening, everyone.